Okay, awesome. I do want to start off. Fucking already messed up. Want to clap that in again. Okay, all right, okay, cool. Welcome to Kanpai Chronicles. I'm sorry, I really messed up really badly there. Welcome to the show with your host, Norman and
Holly.
Shit.
I feel like you do this every time.
Yeah. I know. I feel like I don't know if I just don't have like a proper like signature intro tagline or something to come in. Normally it's to welcome our yabai squad, our most dangerous, our good, our bad, our yabai listeners coming in to listen to the show, or also to watch the show if you're watching this on YouTube, where we talk about all things yabai through our experiences in Japan, anything around Japan, or like that's normally the excuse. Mostly it's our observations of like human nature, etc. So under the guise of something really fun, like for example this episode's topic, I think it'll be pretty cool, pretty exciting to explore this with everybody here. First of all, Holly, how have you been recently?
Stressed. Stressed. Yeah, it's like a little over midway through the semester.
Okay.
So I have lots of projects and stuff I'm working on. I haven't even like started my own research. So I have like some articles I have that I pulled up and I was like, I'll probably read this, but I haven't officially started it. So my deadlines are looming. So the days are getting shorter as we have daylight savings over here. Do you guys do daylight savings in Malaysia? Is that only an American thing?
No. There's DSD everywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
Daylight savings is pretty much consistent all around. It's just that when it happens differs by different regions. In Malaysia, do we have one? I don't think we do, because like how it works is you have like 365.2525 days to make up an entire year or an entire rotation around the sun. So to compensate for the 0.2525, some time zones, because they're just estimates, right? So some time zones are like, add an hour here, minus an hour there, or something like that, just to compensate for that fraction. But the thing is, sometimes we forget, and then all of a sudden you're like, fuck, it's already sunset. Like, what the hell? Like, I don't remember it. Why the hell? Like, why am I having dinner when it's really bright outside? Or like, why am I having breakfast and it's like nighttime or something? We have daily savings all around the world. Don't worry.
Yeah, so it's like dark at 6 p.m. now, and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay. Seasonal depression is kicking in. What about you?
Yeah. I think I'm doing okay. We nearly could not make this recording because I was still recovering from a hangover. Yesterday was Deepavali, so happy Deepavali to our Indian listeners. A very blessed happy Diwali for everybody who is celebrating this amazing auspicious day. I chose to do it in the most non-Indian way possible, which was to get drunk really badly, and it was with a couple of like with two other guys. We went in the middle of the city to drink. We got a bottle of white wine, and I was shit-faced, and we started talking to this like older man and woman next to us, like drinking as well. And first of all, the guy is like Aussie, so he obviously has that amazing like comedic part, as all Australians do.
Right.
But the woman is someone that he just met at a previous bar, and they don't have any prior connection, and she is just batshit crazy. So like we started all drinking, and then just as a joke, me and the Aussie guy was like, we'd put $500 on the table if you could climb a tree. And then she tried climbing a tree because that was how drunk she was. So I have a video of my two friends pushing this woman up a tree as she's trying to climb it. And this is not like a small tree. This is like 2 floors high. Like, this is a big ass tree. And this is like a thick boy, like a thick tree. Like, you gotta hug that shit. So it was pretty funny to see that. Definitely not something that you would see during Deepavali, but I have to say I had a great time, and I'm recovering because of it. But here we are, such as
Yeah, you didn't tell me money was involved. That changes everything. For $500, I'd be
$500
shimmying
to climb a tree. It was a joke.
Yeah.
Me and the guy were like, we're not fucking doing it. Like we're gonna make excuses.
No, I'm like $500. Yeah. Wait, are we talking USD? Because
no. It's
okay.
it's ringgit. So like divide by 4.
Okay.
So that's like
$100-something.
Yeah.
No, still even then maybe
it's like $125 around that.
Yeah.
I'm converting it.
I'll still try to shimmy up a tree for that.
Oh man, please try. We were laughing
right.
so hard. It was like 30 straight minutes. If to the woman, if you're listening to this right now, I'm really sorry that we put you through that. Not that you ever find this show, hopefully. But it's just
be like, there's that asshole.
Great. But yeah, it was a time to celebrate, and it was also a good chance to, like, I don't go out that much because of like COVID lockdown stuff like that. So to actually wind down in that way, or to have an excuse to do so, was great. So I could actually go
literally
crazy.
with some wine.
Yeah, I actually went yabai for the first time in months. Ironically, which is the point of the show, right? To be as yabai as possible.
You were just trying to get some firsthand experience, some new content for the podcast.
I'm researching.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm researching for this episode. It's not even related to this topic that we're going to talk about anyway. But before we do, I do want to bring up the demon to be shared with our listeners for this week, the yokai of the week. It's my turn, and I have picked. So like I've randomized maybe like 5 or 6 times, and I landed on this one, and I picked this one. So you want to have a look at it? You can have a look at it now. This week's yokai of the week is called Suika no Bakemono.
This is pretty much exactly what I thought.
Yeah. So if you know if you're Japanese, or if you have enough of a Japanese language ability, you can pretty much translate what that name is. Suika no Bakemono translates to watermelon monster, and the appearance, as described here on yokai.com, which we'll have the link to this yokai in the show notes. Suika no Bakemono is a strange yokai which looks like a samurai with a watermelon for a head, and it is a yokai that appears in the Buson Yokai Emaki, which is essentially just a series of paintings of yokai as depicted by an artist. We have a number of them, like all around, because we tend to have. I noticed that as we're exploring these different yokais, some yokais are used to describe or to rationalize natural events, but others are like, oh, this crazy ass artist decided to paint this thing and then personify it in a very monstrous form. So this is one of the latter, right? So this guy was just like, hey, let's take a watermelon, stick it on a samurai, and then just call it a monster. And then people are like, oh shit, let me buy that scroll, bro. So we now have this Suika no Bakemono. Before we go ahead into the lore of this watermelon monster, what's your first impressions of this?
Well, upon like first seeing it, I'm just like, what? What? But then as I was kind of like browsing the little info in there, and as you're saying, like it's like just by an artist and doing his scrolls and things like that, I was kind of like, oh, it's not too different from like we have like probably most famously for like that kind of stuff, like Dr. Seuss. So it's not like too much different from like Dr. Seuss, like sitting down and creating all these like weird creatures and stuff that he did for like his stories, his children books, except we don't perceive them as like yokai, like, or spirits or anything. They're just like, oh, children's characters. But I don't know, maybe if Dr. Seuss was like Japanese, maybe some of his characters would have like become lore which is kind of interesting to think about.
The cat in the hat as a yokai. It's just
it comes into your house and fucks shit up.
He's just rhyming your bitch ass until you die. Oh no, I'm not going to lie. Oh no, you are about to die. And then it's just like just dead.
Oh my god. Like I guess some stuff has like kind of stuck. Like for Christmas and stuff, everyone like pretty commonly uses like the phrase Grinch and everything to like describe people and stuff like that. But well, that might be like the only one.
Wait,
I'm
is
not
the
sure.
Grinch like a Dr. Seuss invention? Or
I
is it
think
just
he
the
is.
movie? Okay, right. Because I don't know anything about the Grinch. I only know the movie, right? Like I've only known as a Jim Carrey. Yeah, it's the Jim Carrey movie, and I never knew
Well,
if
there's
the Grinch is
there's
referenced
like
anywhere else.
a animated version of it that came way before the like Jim Carrey version.
Yeah.
Because I think that was I don't know if I saw the animated version first or if I had gotten the book first, but there's a book. And then they had the animated version, then they made the Jim Carrey version. And I think there's another one now even, but I don't think I watched it. But yeah, Grinch is probably and the Lorax.
I don't know
Getting
what
off
that is.
tangent.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to send you the Lorax. Yeah, the Lorax is basically like a little fuzzy creature that like lives in a forest and like speaks for the trees and stuff. And it is a story, like a children's story that actually kind of goes into like capitalism and stuff like that, and how like we use like resources and everything and just like destroy land.
Oh, okay. Right.
But there's a movie for that too. That got pretty popular when it came out over here. So the Lorax and the Grinch, they're probably the two like biggest. But yeah, go back to your watermelon boys.
No, it's just I was just fascinated with all this American yokai that we're learning over time, because we never have any of that referred in Malaysia at all. Like nothing from the Grinch, nothing from Lorax's. The only thing is in popular media, like a movie. So I've only associated these things not as children's tales or creatures or fables, but rather, oh, this is a US Hollywood thing. That it's only within that bubble and nothing else. So I guess that just speaks to what different cultures are exposed to. As in, like, we don't have we celebrate Christmas, but we don't have a Grinch. We just have Santa and reindeers and shit. So yeah. So back to my melons. Right. So this guy, the artist, is named Yosa Buson, which doesn't sound Japanese actually, but I'm not going to complain. One of the greatest poets of the Edo period, from 1716 to 1784. So this is a 1700s yokai. He painted a scroll containing 8 doodles of bizarre yokai, but they're just pictures with names and no stories, which is, I guess, a very normal thing, or like a normalized thing. There isn't some sort of deep ingrained understanding of, like, the Japanese people of the Edo period looked at a watermelon and they're like, oh shit, watch out, it's gonna slice your ass up. Like, it didn't say anything like that. This poet was just like, oh, let me fuse what I've observed, put it together, and then make maybe a caricature or something horrific out of it. But there is so far nothing else from, I guess, in terms of its history, there's nothing else that runs deeper. It's just literally a samurai guy with a watermelon for a head, and then it's just being a samurai. That being said, it looks funny. Like, I'm looking at the picture now, it's funny. It looks hilarious, actually.
Yeah.
But is it scary? Is the question here. I am inclined to think, like, I'm like half afraid. I'm like half amused, half afraid, but I don't know about you.
I mean, just to like see it, like it's funny. Like it's something that's like so like absurd. But and it's hard too, like without like a story based on it, you know? Like what is it, like a watermelon possessed? Like it just gets like a human body and goes off and does whatever? Or like can something happen to people like that for whatever reason they like mutate and become like a watermelon headed like creature? And like most like creatures and stuff that I've come across in like tales, like there's like some like story to it or some like lesson, you know, like you could turn into this if you're like a bad person or whatever, or like, oh, if you go and do this you could like run into this. Like they're usually like kind of like cautionary
Yeah.
tales. So with these what like I don't know. And he is an artist, so like maybe he just is like inspired. Like there's lots of people that'll just see something and kind of get inspired to like create something from that. So it's like he could have just been like seen a bunch of watermelon fields and he was like, I'm gonna make some watermelon heads. Like there's not usually like a method behind the madness of some like artistic creations. Like you can just see something and you're like, okay, yeah, what if I like put a body on that or like whatever.
The thinking process behind it is like,
Yeah.
this fruit is juicy. What if it has a human body? Oh, let me
Right,
draw
right.
that.
There's lots of artists that I will like find online where they do that with like girls, where they'll see like something like a fucking peppermint and then they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna make like a sexy peppermint girl
Right.
or
Yeah.
like stuff like that. So that's not like a like weird thing to do. Like now that I think about it, to just like see these things like randomly, you're like, the fuck. But upon thought, it's like, no, okay, actually, like for an artist, that'd be pretty normal like thing to just sit down and do, like create just something out of your imagination.
It's also something that we tend to do if we want to find something to relate to in regards to that object. Like the personification of something makes it a lot more, shall we say, you find more angles to rationalize your relationship with this thing. Like when you were saying like, oh, you know, finding a peppermint and making a sexy girl version of it, the first thing that came to my mind was that viral picture of like planet Earth as a sexy anime girl. I think I don't know if you've seen that picture before. Yeah, it's just like Earth Chan or something. I forgot the name. But like that was pretty viral. And that went everywhere. And then there's another like there's another anime. I forgot the name. It's like, is it like Dragon Maid or Samatoka? I forgot. But it's one of the characters is a goddess who is actually a catfish, but then she's basically drawn as like a MILF, basically, just like voluptuous Onechan style woman.
Yeah,
but she's actually a catfish. But for some reason, people gravitate towards that a lot more, and I guess it resonates with their lower chakras, if you know what I'm talking about. So, like when that happens, you start to find more reasons to pay attention towards this thing. And I guess in the case of a watermelon, what would make a watermelon more interesting if there's a human version of it? So, that being said, yeah, there's no story because it's just a doodle. It's just yokai fanfic, I guess.
Yeah.
So would it be scary? Like, if you want to tier this, would it even be fair to put this on the tier list because there's no like backstory? Or if given all this now, because it's quite limited, would you say that it should be on there, but it's like quite low?
I'd say, I mean, we can include it there. Like, I would put it quite low just because there isn't like story to it. We could give it anything. Like, we could make it horrifying. We could be like, oh, if the watermelon head bursts, it turns into some like fucking crazy thing. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's the fear factor to it. It's like, you just don't fucking know. This watermelon head could be like up to anything.
I would think
for just as it is, they probably just bottom of the tier. Just an interesting watermelon boy.
Yeah, I'm thinking E or F. Like, I mean, it's a samurai, so I'm assuming they have a sword. If you say something bad, they're gonna get angry and they might kill you. That could be one way of looking at it. Maybe like calling them a fruit is a racist thing to say. You never know, right? It could be God. Like you gotta. They have watermelons have to represent, right? So if you're not showing them by their right identity, they might like slice you up. That could be possible. And slicing is a very watermelon thing. So
that's true. That's true. Suika gang.
Suika gang. It's summertime, boys.
Yeah, that's when they come out to avenge their fallen watermelons that get eaten during the summertime.
I feel like we're just filling up the backstory and it's just like pushing the tier up like a lot more for it. I guess. I mean, in the end, it is a samurai, and samurais do kill. So, C, because it's not horrific, right? Like the only thing that's mildly strange is just the head. Yeah. Anything else, they would be acting like normal samurai. So there's like practically zero horror factor once you get past the fruit part. So I would say C. It's a very safe.
Yeah, that would probably be fine.
Okay. Our watermelon boy is at C tier. All right. Okay. Now, here's the thing. The reason why after randoming multiple times, like clicking the random button, the reason why I landed on this one was because looking at the picture felt like it's really ridiculous, like the idea of it. And normally you don't see this kind of thing in classic Japanese lore, like yokai. Like we've seen so far out of all the yokai in our tier lists, they've always had some sort of cultural implication. But then this one is it's just ridiculous and it has no background. There's no backstory to it. It is just the exploration of a creator observing the world and then creating or manifesting their own imagination into reality, trying to fit into that, right? So I thought this would fit really well with this episode's topic, because in this episode's topic, that's what everyone's doing. They put all the ideas onto paper, then they make a story out of it, and then they give birth into the amazing 2D world of anime. So I feel like it'll be a great transition to talk about our weeb sides, our 2D Oni-chan Kokosei weeb sides, and see where that goes. So
the part we try to keep hidden.
Yeah, the part where you're trying to be professional, you don't really tell people what's your favorite Naruto character or some shit, but you end up showing it to everybody because you're wearing the Konoha headband or something. So yeah, this week's about anime. And Holly, what's the first anime you've ever watched? Actually, would be a good start for this, if you remember.
That one's hard because it'd probably have to be. Well, it's weird because I don't feel like we consider Pokemon an anime. Like I think like it technically is, but I feel like we don't. And I don't know why. I don't fucking know why, but it just doesn't. I don't know. But I would have to say either like media from Japan that I saw like on TV was probably either Pokemon or Sailor Moon. And then from there it would go into like Dragon Ball Z, Inuyasha,
Ooh.
like Rurouni Kenshin, Yu Yu Hakusho. It was like a late night anime that they would play. But probably the first one that was like, what the fuck is this? That seems so different from like American cartoons would be Sailor Moon.
Wait, so you were
What about
also watching American cartoons as well, right? Like at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you would start to like know the differences. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah. I pretty much watched the same. Like it was the same for me. It was those same shows, exactly those. Like on top of that would be like Ranma and a half, or Samurai X, like Rurouni Kenshin. And then late at night you get Ninja Scroll, and that's when it's like, oh my god, 18 plus nude bodies and shit on Ninja Scroll. So I have to be careful about that whenever there's like family around. But also Digimon. So like I watched Digimon more than Pokemon. So I was way more like in the Pokemon versus Digimon camp. I was always Digimon from the get-go. Even though we played the games and everything, like even though we had like the Pokemon Tamagotchi, whatever, but my heart has always been with like Agumon and Gabumon and everyone. Even though everyone at school is just like, oh my god, Pokemon is way better. I'm like, no, fuck you. If you put them all together, like Digimon will win hands down, 10 times out of 10. Pokemon always wins because of friendship, or like some shit that Ash does.
Yeah, I feel like the kids at like my school, at least from what I can remember, like people didn't really like get into any of that stuff. I think the kids that I like had talked to about like Pokemon and stuff were very like few and far between. Yeah, it was very like stereotypical actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Like the boys were into like Power Rangers, Ninja Turtles, like the American classic things. The girls, I don't even really remember talking too much about like cartoons or anything like that. So there were a couple like boys that I would hang out with. And I think in the second grade, one of them was like obsessed with Digimon. And so we would get into like nerd fights about which one was better, like Pokemon or Digimon. So it took me a while to like even give Digimon like a chance. And then when I did, I was like, damn, that like angel fucking Digimon, like ripped boy.
Yeah.
And then the like characters were cute, but Digimon never gave me the same this is amazing feeling as Pokemon did.
Okay. There are some parts of Pokemon that I really like, enjoy so much. The movies are like fucking amazing. I don't know what it is about, like the show is like, okay, that's good, right? Like the formula is pretty much the same every episode, but the movie is like, wow. Like my favorite, even until now, my favorite Pokemon movie is the 3 Legendary Birds movies. The one with like,
oh yeah, I think
the
that was
first
like
3,
2000.
and then also like the one with Lugia as well. Oh my god, so amazing. Because even until now, my favorite Pokemon is Zapdos. I just love that bird. So cool.
Yeah, my older sister, her favorite is Articuno. So I think we went together to see when Pokemon 2000 came out. I think we went together to see that one because she was excited that like one of her favorite Pokemon was like featured.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know the years went on, and so that I guess so that our I don't know for you, my tastes in anime evolved, I guess, because other than the usual like action anime that I would just keep watching. Just like, like that you don't really need much thinking power. You're just like, oh shit, they're fighting. Oh my god, that's so cool. Holy shit, right? Like just Dragon Ball. Like that's an example. Or Digimon, they're just fighting more and more monsters. But my taste for anime evolved with the inclusion of way more, I guess, mainstream anime. But also, once I could find a way to like watch all these different shows, so many different kinds, led me to want to explore the deeper, darker, complicated, and shall we say complex animes that was just so captivating, even if I didn't fully understand them. Like just watching it is sort of like glorious in its own way, because I watched Ghost in the Shell when I was young, and I didn't understand it at all. But when I watched it when I was young, I was like, whoa, this is so cool, because they're all cyborgs and shit. But then when I watched it again when I was older, I was like, wow, the dialogue is amazing. Like it's like pretty cool what they're talking about. But yeah, like maybe one angle of going about this, the world of anime, is what are some of the animes that have been such a huge impact on you as a fan of anime, or like just as a fan of like Japanese culture in general?
When I think about that, I think probably about the ones that I saw like when I was younger. Because for me, I don't know, I'm kind of like odd and stuff. So even if I didn't understand things in a grander like sense that I can now, I still feel like I liked anime because it was offering me more than what the typical like cartoons did. There was kind of like a like darkness to like anime that I was drawn to, probably, with these like monsters and themes and things like that. And really like life issues. I remember like as I think I was still in elementary school. I was probably in like 4th or 5th grade, and one of my friends was kind of like making fun of me for watching anime. And they're like, why do you watch that? And I'm like, well, it's just like the stories. Like they have really like deep stories. And then like my friends didn't really I didn't even understand what I meant by that. But I remember like Sailor Moon specifically is one of those like fucking be a good friend like sort of things.
Yeah.
Like every episode, and also like girl power, which I feel was getting more like prominent in the 90s, like women like really just starting to like embody themselves more. So I remember like watching that and feeling like, yeah, I can beat up boys and like stand up for myself and things like that. And then I tried rewatching it, I think a couple years ago. I can't really deal with like the voice acting and like the like American version anymore. It's like very like shrill. But I got through like a couple episodes, and I was like they always have these little like lessons at like the end that they'll like say before or after the credits, and you're like, fuck yeah, okay, like cool. And then as like you said, like as we got older and technology like developed and we have access to like all this stuff, I would rewatch certain things. Like Yu Yu Hakusho is one of my like favorite of all time. And so I started looking for more that were kind of like that, and you get into like these psychological like things. I remember watching Psychopaths, and really like the concept of like what is fucking like right or wrong or good or bad and stuff like that was like also like Ghibli films were really interesting to me, because typically in like American media, it's very black and white. You have like a good guy and a villain. And in Ghibli films, like specifically, but then also you get this like in anime, the conflicts that arise they really kind of make you think a lot more, where it's like it's not as simple as like this is the good person, this is the bad person. There's so many things like in between and reasons why like each person believes or acts like the way that they do. So it provided like a lot bigger of like a worldview, I feel, than I would get just from my standard like American media.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. Um, even Rurouni Kenshin wasn't a good example. Like, I remember religiously watching that anime like every time that it was on. And it, most of it was standard formula, like good and bad, etc. But then when they started adding in complex villains, I think that was what made it very intriguing. As in, there was way more screen time to look at the backstory of the villain or the antagonist, at least, in terms of why they're doing this, why do these ideals clash. And I guess I've just been fed with like, normal movies, normal cartoons, etc. of, villain bad, it's good to beat them, okay, done, hero wins. It's just like that, right? We never really think about the other side. But I guess the format of a 20-minute episode every week is that there's enough space to explore the depth of how the villain ended up becoming the antagonist of the hero story from our perspective. Whenever we're watching an anime, it's normally through the eyes of the main character, right? It's very rare that we find like, oh, now we look from the other side as to why they turned bad, or they used to be the hero and then they went really, really bad. I didn't really care about that. But what was really interesting is if you're used to that, you grow up thinking about that gray space more, that change in morality, and you start to expect that from other shows. So I think the more that we start exposing ourselves to different animes and different genres, the more that we start to refine our taste in what would captivate us in terms of the depth of a story, or what are the different places in a show where we want our attention to be captured to. It's not just the hero 99% of the time. It's like, the hero in this broken world with these antagonists and these other anti-heroes and then these other villains who are actually good, or something like that. Like, we want it to be more complex because we are capable of understanding that. And this is when I started to have problems with how do I word this? Perceptions of anime, where you have complex animes like Psychopaths, right? Like amazing dialogue and discussion, etc. You have shows like Hunter x Hunter, where they would have this amazing backstory for the villain, where it almost makes you want to root for the villain even though they're bad by definition. But then whenever we talk about anime with like people at school or whatever, they tend to focus on like maybe the big three, or just a few bunch of shows, and then that's like the general pattern that they view anime as a form. And it makes it very hard to like relate to other people about like anime when you want to be like, oh, you're an anime fan, what anime do you watch? And then maybe like the only show they watch is Naruto. Not that I'm shitting on Naruto, I enjoyed the show, but sometimes if that is your expectations for anime, it's kind of difficult to try to talk about anime in general. But yeah,
I think it also is like how people who are into like anime and Japanese culture in general, again, how do I want to word this? There's like your typical like representation about it, or the people who kind of like completely remove themselves from reality and are like so wrapped up into like the fantasy world, which I think is a part of anime, like that escapism. I think that is, at least for me, like part of the appeal. I am a person who has never really felt like I fit in like our world. So sometimes when I do watch certain anime, I'm like, yeah, I just want to pretend like what it would be fucking like to be teleported someplace and have to like learn how to survive and shit. Um, so I think that a lot of people that maybe struggle even more to maybe conform and try to blend into like our society, they take like a full on like escape route, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff becomes like their whole personality and their whole like perception. So I think that adds another layer to it, where if you're someone who likes to kind of like analyze anime and talk about those like deeper themes, a lot of people aren't really going to give you the chance to do that, because their perception of a person who watches anime is very much like, oh, like you just have, they like on the internet they'll just call you like a weeb, and like they just think like you're just nonsense. I feel like it might change like a little bit, because anime is kind of like mainstream right now. So maybe people are more like open to like converse about it, but I also don't know, because I feel like the way that it's like mainstream right now is still also kind of cringy, where it's just like people from My Hero that I would have sex with. Like it's still it's still very like
Deku, more like
kind of
Diku.
cringe. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Um so I don't know. I don't know how like anime being mainstream right now is gonna affect future anime fans, but
I have a feeling we're always going to have that massive casting net of mainstream anime, which would, influence the general narrative of the form, where we'd have like, My Hero, Bleach, or Naruto. Sorry, Boruto, to get that correct.
no,
It's
yeah.
basically the shitty sequel. Sorry, guys, I just didn't enjoy Boruto at all. No one's watching it. It doesn't fucking matter. Anyway, yeah, it's to the point where the general discourse around these shows are pretty. It's almost like adding that flavor of BuzzFeed spice onto it. Like,
Yeah.
I guess it's just another way of showing your appreciation for the show, because it's a good show. It is a good show. I like My Hero. I like watching it.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna LARP myself into pretending that I'm a student at UA high school, and trying to figure out what's my quirk at 5 years old, and or like what trying to argue for the extent of the powers, quirk abilities of Stars and Stripes. It's just all this insane stuff happening. But it does speak to the point that you said about weebs. So while you were explaining that, I actually looked up the origin of the word weeboo, and it turns out that it is a derivative of the word Weaponese, which is basically wannabe Japanese. But
Oh, I forgot about that.
yeah, you don't use that word anymore. And then
Yeah.
weeboo is just the word used by a comic artist who just switched the word to like a nonsense version of that meaning. So it's just weeboo. It's basically just a derogatory, dumb term for like a wannabe Japanese person. And normally it's someone from a Western culture who is so obsessed, which is interesting because we don't see that from the other way around, or like from other medias. Like, have you ever met someone who is so obsessed with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that they want to be a turtle, or like they are so obsessed with like Power Rangers that their whole narrative, their whole influence, even their semantics is like as if they're doing like a Power Rangers pose every single time? I don't really see that, but with anime, I see
Yeah.
it like almost all the time.
And I feel like with Japan in general, like I really do wonder where that comes from, because like people that are like Japan like fanatics, we've all met one, where it's like they envision Japan as like a perfect world for some reason.
Yeah.
And I don't quite understand like where that comes from. Like, because even when you're just explaining weeaboo, and to say like to even call that a wannabe Asian, like that's almost insulting, because people in Asia don't act like that.
Yeah.
Like that's not, you don't just have your people running around like yelling like Oni-chan seriously, and like panty shots everywhere you go. Like that's not how it is. So I wonder like what goes on in the mind. Like when does it change from like, okay, anime exposed you to Japanese culture, and so you're like, okay, so like what's this other culture? Like there's people that go that route where they're like interested, like because Japan is so, at least with America, it's so different from America.
Yeah.
And so you can like discover all these differences, and you have a more like, I want to become expanded in my like cultural awareness. But then you have the people that are like, fuck yeah, Naruto. Like I'm gonna go to Japan and I'm gonna live off ramen, and I'm gonna work on my like jutsu, and like everything's gonna be fucking fine. Like I wonder where that comes from, like why people see Japan as like such an escape. Because there are shows and media and everything anywhere that have like traveling to different worlds and things like that. But I don't feel like you usually get like that extreme.
It's unnatural, isn't it? I've always
Yeah, like
thought.
we do. You can go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I've always thought that that um that unnatural, shall we say, framing of this faraway culture as an escape route is almost like some kind of packaged patriotism, which looks really pretty.
Mm.
Because once you've enjoyed or watched enough shows, all of a sudden you worship like the location or the origin from where all these shows come from. And then all of a sudden your narrative starts to form around this thing. And it almost sounds like someone who is very patriotic towards their own nation. But instead, it's just towards the nation that created all these animes. So you start to think, oh, if I start to live my life like I'm in Naruto, then obviously when I go to Japan, everybody is a ninja and everybody has like chunin, jonin exams, and everybody is like ninja running down the streets and having like ninja wars and all that shit. And the thing is, right, like I'm saying this out of jest, but I saw it in person in Tokyo. And,
Yeah.
and my brother has as well. So it's not just me being biased because I used to live there or we both used to study there. Like the people I know who went there for travel or something. Like my brother was he stayed at a manga cafe for a couple of days in Tokyo, and then it was just a small couple of days there, and then on the way he passed by Akiba on the way to meet a friend. He saw an American guy uh wearing the Naruto headband, reading like Naruto manga and trying to like purchase like more and more manga volumes to bring back as gifts. And he doesn't mind wearing it out in public. But obviously, throughout Tokyo, we're not really wearing ninja headbands around. It's almost like, I don't know if you notice, but it's almost like, I don't know if you know the story of Cowboy Tanaka. Have you ever heard of that? Okay. Cowboy Tanaka. Uh, this Japanese guy named Tanaka is an Americanophile, if that's a word. He's watched so many Western movies. He changed his name to Cowboy Tanaka, and then he moved to Texas, and now he's staying in Texas, and he's always wearing a cowboy hat. And so
Mhm.
whenever he introduces himself, he's called, "My name is the Cowboy Tanaka," and that's
Mm.
basically an American weeb, pretty much, right?
Right. It's interesting. I mean, I guess like you can be drawn to like places. Like you can have like places that really like just like make you feel like a certain way. Like for me, um part of like being in Japan, like I always felt like, oh, I need to like really like do my best and like work hard because everybody else around me is. When it comes to the opposite, like I feel like a lot of people from Japan specifically that I've met when they come to places like Europe or Canada, um, they feel like they can be more authentic. Um, and so maybe for whatever reason, it's kind of like people who are weird here think like, oh, if I go to Japan, like because I like Japanese like media, like maybe I'll be like seen better when really like Japan, like Japanese society at least is way more like rigid than like America is in my experience. Um but you can do things like I do think there is a little bit more freedom, like especially if you're somewhere like in Tokyo where you like foreigner or not, like people cosplay. Um so depending on like where you're at, it would be more acceptable for you to like go out dressed up from time to time. Obviously not like going to like your fucking job or something, but if you're like, oh, I want to just go get a meal in Harajuku, like I don't think it would be like too like crazy to go out in your like Naruto jumpsuit. um like there are gonna obviously be some people that are like, what the fuck? But I feel like it, and in some ways like it would be like a little more normal, at least in like Harajuku, because everybody goes there and dresses up, or lots of people do. But I don't know, like I don't know, I just feel like it's a different kind of like extreme. I think we also have a lot of people that are like super obsessed with Korea in the States. Um, but typically, like they're pretty like one dimensional about that. Like that's simply just because they think everybody's hot in Korea. Um, I don't see too many people that are like, yeah, I go to Korea so I can like be my number one self and drink like fucking pop bottles and shit. And I don't know. Like I feel like it's different. Like the people that have this idolized like fantasy version of Japan, I feel like are unlike anybody else that I have like come across.
It's also that line of thinking also seems justified because in Japan, cosplaying, obsessing over anime is tolerated a lot better in Japan, especially
Yeah.
because that's the origin, right, of like Japanese
Yeah.
animation. So seeing it around is not that bad. I mean, technically, if you stay there, you would know. Technically, people would judge you silently, but they won't say it out
Yeah.
loud. So
Yeah.
if you don't really care about what they think, then it doesn't really matter. Whereas,
Yeah.
say, in Australia or in Malaysia or in the US, maybe, the judging is more explicit, or like you're called out on it, which is very uncomfortable for people if it's something like a hobby that you really cherish or you really adore.
Mhm.
So I can understand the pursuit of wanting to look at it from what's the phrase, like rose tinted glasses. But the thing is,
Yeah.
when you view a nation from a fantasy point of view, your overall impression of the people, the experience there, and even your semantics gets so distorted that
Mm.
I feel like you lose out when it comes to traveling there and really fully experiencing, because you're not trying to go to Japan, you're trying to go to the place that invented Konoha, right?
Yeah.
Or the place that invented like the Super Saiyan race or something like that, right? Like it's almost as if you have put constraints on your ability to be open-minded and expand upon what is there beyond anime.
Yeah.
A bit sad, to be honest. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And then you have like the fucking, I'm sorry, this will probably like piss a lot of people off, but like
I think we have already this throughout this talk, so it's fine. You can just go full on.
And then you have like when it goes a step further into just like if you just want to like escape and you want to live in like a fantasy, this sort of thing, like that's, I can feel like, okay, whatever. Everybody's got their own fucking shit going on in your brain. And if you've had enough and you want to just check out, then okay. But then there's the people that will watch anime or consume like Japanese media and they go to Japan and just like want to get with women. And that really just like rubs me the wrong way because like in the States at least, the men here will see Japanese women as these like subservient like fucking females that they can just like whatever with and treat like any certain way. And so like when I was over there and you go out to like bars and stuff like that, it's like you meet a lot of foreigner guys that are like that. And like that is something that like I really can't stand. It's one thing to like joke like with your friends about like like anime titties, but it's another thing to like go anywhere and treat people in any kind of like disrespectful way just because like you saw something in whatever type of media.
Especially if it's, I mean, especially if it's encouraging predatory behavior. Like that's whether in any country or context, like if it's going to be in a very degrading manner like that, like you're doing, what is it, PUA? Is it pickup or whatever it is? What's it called? And you're essentially objectifying a demographic because of your own selfish needs. That's when it crosses the line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is when like not only anime, I mean, anime does contribute a lot to it, but Japanese media or media from any, well, let's just say cultural resources from any country are a double-edged sword because they build our impressions for us. Like if, for example, I'm in the US, I don't know anything about South Korea, and I ask people about like, hey, what are South Korean people like, right? Or how is the culture there? What are the people there? The best person to ask is another South Korean person, right? But maybe, let's just say that you don't know anyone from South Korea. So the first thing you look for is maybe shows or movies or TVs. And all of a sudden you're put into this funnel of the nation in its most exaggerated form. In Korea, it would be like idols, right? In K-pop. So it exaggerates appearances because everybody is beautiful in the world of idols.
Right.
In Japan, creativity is shown really well in the world of anime. So you just have these large amount of genres, and they've given birth to so many fantasy worlds, from ninjas to sci-fi to whatever. But that distorts your impression because you now see through movies and anime how this country works. And we can, like, people think they can safely conclude that what I'm seeing right now on my screen is how it is in the country. So if that will also include general impressions of, say, behaviors of women or behaviors of men or high school life, because there's a lot of genres on high school, a lot of animes on high school life, or even high school sailor outfits and shit like that. All of a sudden, the ones who are thinking with their dicks are like, oh shit, okay, well, let me just like satisfy my desires this way, and then all of a sudden it's just like that, as if it's normal. Here's the thing, though. This is touching on our ability to connect and disconnect fiction from reality, especially when it's such a high class form of entertainment. Like when you watch an anime, it's like colors, art style, there's like movie beats and narratives, there's like character development, there's sound, there's even like voice actor performances. There's a lot of things happening at the same time to tell you a story.
Yeah.
Just like how that's why like cinema as is a field that everyone is researching at this point in time. Anime is the same, except you're hand drawing things and you're coloring things. There's so many messages, so it's such an addicting thing. And then all of a sudden that becomes your only source of information for what to do when you go there. It's going to be hard to convince people to say, like, to convince them that no, there are no ninjas in Tokyo, like Naruto does not exist, or like girls aren't giving you panty shots on demand every episode. And there is no hot spring episode like in every anime in your experience traveling there. It's insane. And it's to the point where, and to me, the hardest part, what pisses me off specifically, is the, how do I word this? The moral outrage and disagreements with anime shows, but the expression of that frustration at innocent bystanders, which is very, very specific thing. But like I have a story for that. I have a half Japanese, half Australian friend, based in Sydney, and he watches anime and stuff, but he's not really like a full-on weeb or anything. Went to a gathering for international cultural exchange, something along those lines, with like Japanese students and international students. And he was confronted by an Australian student who, upon watching anime, had this hostile impression of Japanese men and took it out on him because he just happened to be the closest Japanese person there. So I feel like there's like I don't know if there needs to be a minimum requirement of EQ before someone can watch an anime, so that they can like disconnect that, okay, not all men act like this, or not all women are like this. To not paint your impressions of people from like through the film and animations that you watch, but to rather observe it yourself and ask appropriately. But as a result, he just had a bad experience because he just went in there and he just got shat on by someone who was just pretty racist. Even though he had absolutely nothing to do with it, he was just one of the people participating. So yeah, it's tragic. Like sometimes people are weaponizing the supposed insights they get from anime, and they're using it in a very, very harming way, and that scares me at times.
Yeah, and I feel like that's an issue with everything. It's something that I think about a lot recently, because really, like, everyone is an individual, like regardless of like what your background is, like how you identify, whatever, your thoughts and opinions are your own. Like, you're not a part of a group in that sense. Like, you can have your like identity and everything, but like you're an individual. I started thinking about that a lot as I've like been diagnosed with autism, and I start to read various like other people on the spectrum and like their opinions and their accounts. And I feel like you find this in any fucking like community anymore. People think like there's just one way, but there's not. And I feel like, especially when we're consuming like a lot of like a country's media, we're not really thinking like, first off, this is fiction. things are gonna, especially in anime, things are very like exaggerated as far as like the acting and the dialogue and stuff. When it's like an imported media, you are viewing something that your country has approved for you to see. It's a little different like with the internet, like you have more access to like whatever, but you're still being given like a certain thing that the creator wants you to see. And to take that and just assume everybody else is the same, I think that's like a very human thing. Like you could watch, maybe the only thing you've seen about Japan is like some visual K like music video. It's the only thing you've ever experienced about like Japanese culture. And so you're like, oh, okay, everybody dresses like that over in Japan, I guess. And people generalize, even though within our own cultures, there's so much like stuff going on. Like I remember when I went to Japan and like learned about dialects, like all these places have different dialects. And I was like, oh, wow. And then I was like, wait, no, that like makes fucking sense. Like in America, we all have like different accents and stuff like that. So obviously, like anywhere you go, like that's going to be the case. And I don't know. People like that are just fucking dicks. Like, but you get that anywhere. Like when I was in Japan, it was like peak of all the like Trump running for president, like shit. So people were always like, oh, you're from America, like you support Trump? And I'm like, no. No. No, please. Please don't think that we're all like that.
I guess it's a standard pattern when you build this like impression of a faraway place, and then the first thing you default to is the things that you consume with the lowest barrier of understanding, right? Like, oh, like if you look at a country, you look at the food and you can probably easily associate which food with each country, because that's a low barrier of understanding. It's like, oh, sushi, raw fish, oh, that's Japan, right? Like, oh, ramen, okay, that's Japan. Or oh, fried rice, that's like, different Asian countries, etc. Whereas the US could be, I don't know, like burgers or something. It could be like very, very typical. But then when it comes to understandings of, the depth of cultural understanding, one thing to note here is maybe the reason why people have very absolute impressions of a culture or another country is that they just don't want to go any deeper than that. Like they're just enjoying the shows and then that's it. Like they just want to watch only Naruto and then obsess over Naruto because they love Naruto. It's less about the country and it's more about the fact that, they they harbor such great admiration for the show that it just propels their narrative for the entirety of their life, or like growing up. So when you start to think about things like exceptions or questioning generalizations or validating patterns of people from this country, from this nation you're looking at, a lot of people are not willing to put in that energy to look at the differences. A lot of people are not going to introspect on this as much as, say, you or me. If you and I are going to go to an anime event and we're going to talk about anime with people, we can probably expect the conversations to be not that long. It will just be like, oh my god, have you like seen the latest episode? Oh my god, oh right, oh my god, I ship this character. It's very, very surface level. It's very rare that you start talking about things like, oh, what are the implications of the last episode of Psycho-Pass, right? Who really is the main character? That's an example, right? Or what are the political implications of Ghost in the Shell, right? Is it like a frustration against the government or rebellion against different hierarchies of power, things like that? We had this in Rikyo, we had this class on critically deconstructing different forms of anime and writing papers on that and essays on that, which was a fantastic class, although I wasn't a fan of the teacher. It was a great class. It was pretty fun. And what was it? Our group was in charge of Pokemon, I believe. Although I forgot what it was that we talked about. I think it was along the lines of because Pokemon was built, the creator of Pokemon made Pokemon based off of his memories collecting insects in the forest. So we were looking at Pokemon as a form of packaged nostalgia for anyone watching. So it's a digital version of them going to the forest collecting things because it makes them feel like kids again. So what are the implications of that for the audience? Why is it that we obsess so much over characters and all of that? So we're going back and forth on that. So that was an example of like what people would write about in that class. Now, do people care about that? Is a different story. If you get like 10 of your friends who watch anime, how many of those 10 friends would care to read the paper that you wrote about that? People honestly don't care. I think they just fantasize and that's it. It's just dreaming.
Yeah, I get like that a lot with like Pokemon specifically because like the creator of Pokemon is on the autism spectrum, and so my like interpretation of that, I'm like, oh, he really just took like his special interest and like created like a career off of this. Like his special interest was like bugs and stuff, and then as he grew up and had to, you know, do your standard like societal things and like find jobs and stuff like that, he was like, oh, I'm gonna create like a story off of like what I actually like, and it just blew up like everywhere. And so I'll like talk to people about that and I can see them just like okay, Holly, and I'm like excited, I'm like and they're just like, yeah, so the new Pokemon game is gonna come out, cool. I'm like, fuck, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go fuck off now, sorry. Or there was another anime, Beastars, that got pretty hyped up because it's like people are like, oh, fucking furries. So I was kind of hesitant to like watch that anime because I was like all the only things you'd see from it like posted online were some questionable like sexy little instances going on, and I was like, is it just like a furry like kind of situation? And I gave it a shot and I was like, oh my god, like this story is actually fucking amazing. And then like for me, I'm like, I could totally understand why they would create these characters as animals, because that is the easiest way to kind of portray like racism, I would say, without being racist in your content. If you're kind of separating like the human image out of it and you're using animals to talk about these complex issues within society and things like that, there's a lot less people you're going to offend, which I think in this like day and age, it's just fucking everybody's offended by everything, no matter what point you're trying to make. And so like by using animals to do this story, I'm like, that was fucking genius. You're like, fucking incredible. But then there's still people that are just so caught up on like fucking furries that they'll never get like anything more than that. Like they're only gonna be like, furries, I just ew.
we might just be dealing with like the mass group of people who are just thinking with their dicks, right? It's just like, oh, furries, yeah, that's what they wanted. Like they got what they wanted. But a certain percentage would want more, right? Like
Yeah.
the story, the deeper implications. So I've heard of Beastars. I've never actually watched it, or I've never read the manga. But
Mm.
when you were explaining the notion or the implication of like exploring racism through these characters, I immediately thought of Aesop's fables, because that's how it was portrayed then. You have these
Mm.
stories, and they're not told through humans, they're told through animals, but then
Mm-hmm.
there apparently are like nicer vessels to carry the message or the point of the story. Whereas if you try to put humans, like if you do like the turtle and the hare, but it's two humans, then it doesn't seem so interesting. But then you put an actual turtle and an actual hare, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, I understand the implication. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
a story behind it, like a lesson. I'm like, okay, let me try to apply that. Whereas with Beastars, I guess that's okay. Which we see that lesson packaging happening en masse in a lot of mainstream animes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, always work hard, like My Hero, or friendship in Fairy Tale. That's the best plot armor ever. Or Nakama in One Piece, or training hard in Dragon Ball or something. The thing is, maybe there's some slight frustrations with like animators, I guess that's what they call them. Where you have to find a balance between creating a creating a an anime or an animation that can deliver your intended message in its most perfect form, versus conforming to an animation or art style that would please as much of an audience as possible. Because
Yeah.
like maybe the Beastars animators would be more interested in maybe a more gory version or a darker version, or even violent version, if they're going with, if they're trying to explore the extent of like race as a topic. Maybe that's a possibility. But the limitations of animation, or anime rather, are that it's there to entertain, not to spark a debate.
Yeah. I would think that some writers maybe want to spark a debate.
Mm.
Like, I think entertainment in any form, like reading, movies, shows, stuff like that. I think there are lots of creators that want a certain message to come through and like spark conversation, aside from just mindless entertainment. Like there definitely is like lots of anime that's just mindless, like entertainment. Like there's not much going on, or there's like anime that's just like absolute like fucking gore or something. There's not really like a lesson or anything. It's just horror. Um, but I do think like with lots of like anime, there is like deep themes going on in there.
One thing I noticed though is that some or a number of animes have very common patterns. And I guess this is in regards or in response to the popularity of that theme or genre. And when I was actually talking about this with Sid like last week or something, where we were wondering why there were so many mangas and animes on high school life, or like the setting
Mm-hmm.
is always a high school. So maybe the story itself, like the anime itself, doesn't really have that much of a deep implication. Maybe it's just the setting. But
Mm-hmm.
we were like cross comparing all of these settings together. There's a lot of high school genre. Sorry, there's a lot of high school animes. There's a lot of isekai animes. Like, oh, you're transported into another world and you get a cheat skill or something like that. And there's like a lot of super powered animes where you have this character, they were weak, and then they start getting stronger, stronger, and then like the formula is pretty much the same. Sometimes it's really fun to look at the common themes between these animes once you line them up, because it looks like it's compensating for something in the culture.
Mm.
Why is it that so many high school animes are coming out? And I'm thinking that it's maybe a case of golden age thinking, where those are the times when you're most free, but then when you're like a salary man working in a kuro kaisha at 9 to 5, even on a Sunday and Saturday, you want to always look back at those times when you're more free and you're with friends, etc. So it's just like, it's like nostalgia to the nth degree. And sometimes it's almost unhealthy, at least in my opinion. Sometimes it's almost unhealthy how that's the only time when you can have fun. Like, it's depicted as such.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts of that. I just found it really fascinating that all of a sudden anime trends showcase not what people are interested in watching, but what people are missing, potentially.
Yeah. Because I've thought about that, because when I'll be watching those kind of like slice of life little like high school anime, I'll be like longing for the fucking teenage years, even though my teenage years weren't even like that great. Be like, yeah, I would love to go back to those days with my friends. And then I'm like, wait, it wasn't like that at all.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, because even when I have heard like my friends in Japan talk about like high school and stuff, it sounds like it's still like a lot of stress. Like in middle school, you're preparing to like get into a good high school. And then in high school, you're like preparing maybe to like get into a university, or you're struggling with like the thoughts of the future. So I don't know. Like, does it accurately represent the experience, or does it create an experience that like we longed to like have had? Because we'll have like that notion like in America as well, as like, oh, your teens are the best years of your life, like high school's best 4 years of your life. I don't think, aside from like the assholes in high school, I don't think anybody feels that way. I don't think anybody looks back on high school and is like, yes. Like the only thing for most people is it's like there's less responsibility. And as you become an adult, everybody dreams of that. You're like, I don't want to be responsible for anything. But now I should have more conversations like with my friends that grew up in Japan about like what their high school experience was genuinely like in comparison to those stories that we see. Like, is it actually like that nice and wholesome, and like getting to like hang out with your friends and not care about stuff?
Yeah, I've had a few, and like, don't get me wrong, like throughout this conversation, I love watching anime in general, like slice of life stuff as well. But I know not to believe it 100% that it is a mirror reflection. So when asking friends on like their high school experience, some of them would be like, "Oh, I focused mostly on the clubs that I joined." Like, for example, Tomo, one of the same students in the dorm that were together with us, he was part of the baseball club for his high school for a very, very long time. So his high school life was like just shaped around that. So that's not really reflective of what we see in these like slice of life romance high school animes. Or most of the time, at least from the people I've talked to, they pass their time with specific like bukatsu or like curricular activities. And that's what has made their 3 years of high school life tick. Because otherwise they're just studying to get into a uni, or they're trying to get into like a high rank uni or something like that. I don't think it was as, I think when you look at these like animes or mangas, it's perfectly engineered nostalgia, and because it's made so beautifully, you start to it's attractive to you because there is a difference between what was then and then this perfect version in front of me. Because like you, like I was watching these shows and I'm like, oh my god, I totally would want to have my first kiss and confession. But then I rolled back to like my I went down memory lane on like my high school experience. It fucking was not like that at all. It was definitely not that pretty at all. Like mine was just a lot of rejections, a lot of dumb shit. Definitely not doki doki at all compared to what was seen with these. So in the end, I think my illusion was broken already, because I already knew that trying to persuade me that my teenage years were my best years was just going to be a waste of energy. And I think that I guess maybe that speaks to, I think maybe it just speaks to the culture, because first and foremost, these animes are meant to be for a Japanese audience anyway, because we're just watching with English subs. So like, right. So there's that, right? Like we are technically outsiders looking in, so can't help it.
Yeah, I didn't think about it. I've thought about it with like American media, but I never really thought about it before, like with Japan. And maybe there's like some overlap where we feel like when we become adults, our lives kind of end in a sense. Like you don't really get to be like your own person anymore. You now have to be a person that is just in society. You don't really have like your own role. Whereas when you're growing up, hopefully you have some like autonomy over like your choices and like what you're doing. Of course, like some kids don't, but in a perfect world. Because I've noticed a lot with media in America, we tend to, a lot of our shows are always based on like teens or like very young 20s, like 20, 22, fucking 23 max. You don't see like much representation past that as far as like a like story. And I'm like, oh, like I feel like that's kind of telling, because I think both America and Japan, maybe, I don't know, I should probably stop tying everything back to capitalism, but like because it's kind of like an expectation that by the time you reach your like early 20s, you have it all figured out, you have your life set in stone, you're set up with like a good job, you're gonna get married and have a family, when really like that's not the reality. And over the past couple years, one of my friends is into like Korean shows, so I've watched like a few more, and I've found like, oh, with like Korean dramas are pretty like interesting to me, because they explore people that are in like their late 30s, 40s, 50s, like some shit happens in life and they have to start all over and like rebuild. And I think that's refreshing, because I'm like, oh, you don't have to have all your shit figured out. Like life is just life. But I feel the representation in a lot of places is so focused on the like young generations and either like living your best life or like figuring all your shit out.
Yeah, that conflict at all ages feels pretty good. Like, as much as I'm not a K-drama person, I mean, technically, if you met me years ago, I would be heavily into K-pop. I mean, as a former president of a university K-pop society. Anyway, but we're past that phase a long time ago. I'm really sorry, guys. You're never gonna see that side of me. I'm
gonna post the photos on the Twitter account.
I have a whole bag of them. Yeah, like what was refreshing, at least for K-drama, despite the fact that the formula is more or less the same, it's just like, hot guy,
Yeah,
hot
yeah,
girl, they see each other, and there's a amazing intro song, there's a singer and all that,
those
right?
nice music breaks and the
Yeah,
sexual tension.
and there's some kind of sarangheo in the background. But yeah, it's refreshing because of the breadth of settings available. Like, oh,
Mhm.
there's in the hospital, or like, oh, lawyers, or oh, those in
Mhm.
different, maybe different different lifestyles completely, like the differences
Mhm.
between them. It's not pretty, right? It's more realistic, it's more grounded.
Yeah.
Which is great, but it's also shows that it is a drama, so you're using real actors, etc. So you're bound to use more grounded settings compared
Mhm.
to like anime. J-drama, yeah, I can see some of that because I used to watch a few. Although it can be a little bit more comedic at times,
Mm.
a little bit artificial. There's still some
Mhm.
elements that we like we've talked about so far here. Some of it does translate even to the J-drama world. Um,
Yeah.
and what was the point I was trying to go with this? Right, yeah. So with K-drama, it's becoming a lot easier to relate to them because they are willing to explore other settings. So the audience that they're attracting has very varying levels of understanding. Like when you think about like just anime, just the art form anime, you already start to get an impression of what an anime watcher looks like, acts like, says.
Mm.
But then when you say K-drama, someone from like your family or your parents or your cousins or even like people in middle school would be watching K-drama because there's a K-drama for all kinds of people. It doesn't seem as constrained rather, or
I
closed,
don't know, like,
unless you're just looking for romantic K-dramas. Then pretty much this is
yeah, I
one
feel
kind of
like at
person.
least from my experience, like running into people that are super into K-drama, not everybody, um, but in general, at least these days, I feel like even a couple years ago it was actually really hard to find anybody who watched like Korean dramas. Um, but now, since more like Korean media is getting like attention, Asian men, at least in the States, have become like hypersexualized. Like in a way I have never seen men in general sexualized. Um like it's fucking crazy. So now even like when I think about people who might be watching like Korean dramas or whatever, I tend to picture like some very thirsty people. But hopefully like they get the stories and they're like taking something from it and it's not just a like damn, look at them hotties, which is fine, like nice, like it, like we can all like appreciate like beautiful people in any form, but
Uh, uh, you say that, but this is speaking as someone who was really into K-pop a long time ago. Korea boos are everywhere. Like we have like boy bands, idol groups, and then K-dramas. It's pretty much the same thing, but in a different performance, right? A different kind of stage,
mm,
a different kind of viewing experience. Instead of them singing and dancing to you and saying how much I care for you, whatever, every album, this is like them being in a show for a whole season.
mm,
Um, I think lust is very adaptable. So it doesn't matter if
mm,
it's Korean men, Japanese men, or whatever kind of Asian media. That element of hypersexualizing a specific demographic is going to be very apparent because
mm,
I think that's supposed to be one of the intended effects because sex sells to a certain degree.
that's
So
very
if
true.
someone is very pretty and is also selling you this vacuum cleaner, you're bound to purchase this vacuum cleaner because this hot guy is telling you, oh, you should buy this vacuum cleaner, like something like that.
Yeah.
And in the case of, upcoming new K-dramas or Korean shows, rather, it's not just dramas. There's some shows as well that are specifically Korean, or movies. It's nice to know that Asian men are being more put into the spotlight. I'm also a little bit worried because it's pretty much setting a demographic of people as trendy rather than as a sustaining impression that people have. It's nice to know that maybe the narrative of like maybe Asian men being seen as less masculine, as an example, that may change over time. That'll be cool. That'll be good. But the the weakness behind the Hallyu wave, or like the K-pop wave, or the K-drama wave, or the anime wave, or the J-pop wave, is that people are now starting to see, as an example, Asian men only as one of those two camps. And if you are in any way, shape, or form, if you have any differences away from those two camps, then you're not attractive. So you're now put as like, now you're in competition with this like hot ass Korean actor. And that's what sucks the most. So yeah, like it's just a battle of impressions at this point. Just like how anime fans, they look at anime and they're like, this is how Japan looks like. Their impression of Japan is now in conflict with how Japan is actually shown when they touch land. As well as like people who love K-dramas, and they might meet hot Korean guys and maybe their behaviors are completely different from how the actors act when they're in their 40s as what retired doctors and surgeons looking for love, or whatever the hell the setting is nowadays. Yeah, it's just I don't know. I don't know if this is just my ego as an Asian man being like threatened here, but but it's just anyway, just from an anthropological perspective, it's just really fascinating to see how people are reacting in general to like
if
Asian media.
you don't mind, like, we don't have to talk about this like on show if it's like uncomfortable, because obviously like I am just an observer. I can't feel the feelings of people that are being like sexualized or anything, but is it like, for right now, would you say, like, obviously like being categorized and perceived as one certain way just based on your race, like no matter what, it's fucking shitty, but are you like is it more difficult for you to process like the hypersexualization that's like going on right now, or like when, at least in Western media, Asians are just perceived as like nerdy like characters?
Well, for the first part, I'd say it's not hard to process that hypersexualization because it's to be expected. The reason, there is a reason why it's called the Hallyu Wave, because the cultural influence is like a wave that just hits. All of a sudden, people are obsessed over BTS, right? Like all of a sudden, these boy bands are like in most people's Spotify playlists all across America. That's an example. It's almost like the Beatles and how they just became everybody's heartthrobs, like for every teenage girl all around the world. It's almost like that. So I don't find it hard that, or I'm not surprised that this has happened. But it has made me more skeptical of people in general, because of, I think, what we talked about earlier, our general impressions of maybe people just watching anime. They're bound to have these like closed constraints, these closed impressions of maybe of Japanese people or Japan culture or whatever. It's the same thing here, except for Asian men. When they say Asian men, no, they mean like, V from BTS is like the Asian men I'm talking about, as an example. So when you speak of hypersexualization of Asian men, I'm thinking of hypersexualization of Korean male pop idols. It's not it's not the stereotype of an Asian man still stands, but who people are being attracted to nowadays is just this protected bubble that is still a subset of Asian men that is expressed so well that people think that this is the only way Asian men should be to be attractive. That I should dance and sing in Korean or act in a drama to be good. Of course, that's not true, right? There's a whole broad range of people, regardless of race, like your personality, your attributes, how you resonate with the other person. These are very, very important. The thing is, with this wave, I've become more skeptical of people who gravitate towards Asians because of their foray into Asian culture through these mediums. So they're it's almost as if they're looking at me through beer goggles.
Yeah.
And once I actually show them who I am, I break that illusion, and then it just ruins the relationship or the connection even more. So on one hand, okay, it's nice. Okay, cool. Asian men are trendy. Yeah, great. But on the other hand, sometimes I feel like some people I've talked to, I feel like I'm being used as a pastime. If that makes sense. Yeah. So it's a kind of a mixed bag, but overall, like in terms of my own personal experience, I try my best to just disconnect from every single one of those things because I'm just not part of it. Like even concerning anime, I don't really talk to people about anime. I watch a lot of anime. I read a lot of manga actually, more than anime, but I don't declare that to the world, right? Saying like, oh my God, the latest Naruto is like, oh my God, wow. I'm not like that. I don't really partake in that discourse.
Yeah, because I've been noticing, because I love like just browsing on like Instagram. I love like photography. I love people's like fashion and stuff like that. And so I remember a couple years ago, kind of realizing that like all white girls are starting to like look the same, like dress the same, like do the same makeup, do the same hair. And then over the past year, I've noticed that like it's kind of becoming the same when I see like Asian men pop up. Like they're all starting to dress the same and like sculpt their eyebrows the same and like get the same haircut. Like at least the like more people that are gaining like a following and stuff that end up like popping up on your Discover. And so like everyone, I was curious about it because I feel like in the Western world, women are fed a certain like idea of beauty. And so when you get on social media, you see everyone trying to fit that. And now that the West, I can't speak for like how it is in other countries because I don't know, but now the West has like an idea of what Asian beauty is. I see more people online like starting to like adapt into that. So I was curious how it affects like my friends that I know that are like experiencing this also like as an Asian person
on the field.
Yeah.
100%.
All right,
Asian.
we're here with Norman on the ground.
Today's weather, thunderstorms of a bunch of K-pop idols all the way around.
One of my friends said like a similar thing where they're like, like it's cool that like, people will like call you hot and stuff and try to like hit on you and stuff, but he was like, you don't really know if it like it's just because you're like it would be cool for them to like be with an Asian right now. Like, do they even like care? That fucking sucks.
We see that all around though.
Yeah,
it's almost this how do I call it? Is it like lustful racism almost? Like let's just like it's a different kind of like racial objectification that
What do they call it? Like fetishizing?
Yeah, I guess it's like fetishism. It might not be one's intent,
Yeah.
but it can be felt as that though. Uh, and the simple filter, or the simple way to determine if it is if you are, seeing someone or talking to someone and they're chatting and whatever, just ask yourself, if you were Asian, would they still continue the conversation with you? And I've had some moments where I'm talking to people, and if the answer to that question is no, I'll be like, okay, this isn't really a valuable connection to have or to maintain, which is tragic, because they're talking with their eyes, basically. They like, you need to look a certain way for them to be bothered to talk to you, which is just horrendous, like just a horrendous experience. You don't want to be like that. It's almost like this might be a little bit similar to the feeling of a model being conscious of their looks, because they're so pretty, they start to look at or become paranoid about when people approach them, they don't know if that they're attracted to them because of their looks, right? So you start to become very wary of the people that you interact with, which is not healthy, but you just can't help but do that to protect yourself, to defend yourself. And to tie it back to anime, this is something I've started to see with Japanese people when speaking with foreigners. The one way to break down the cultural barriers is the media that we trade, right, with each other. And anime is just one amazing export of Japan. So when a Japanese person meets a foreign person for the first time, there is actually a notable percentage chance that they're going to start talking about anime or manga. And that's just going to be the basis for what they have in common, etc. And sometimes this can be a little bit too much for both parties, where for the Japanese person side, what if this person is like, the person they're talking to is a huge weeb, and they just can't help but talk about the 25 animes in the 12 seasons that they've watched in the last 3 years. And then maybe this Japanese person is just a normal person who's just like, oh, maybe I've watched like One Piece episode or something.
Because
pretty jarring.
A lot of like your just like daily people you're gonna meet around Japan, like they don't really get into like anime. There might be one that's like popular like on TV that they'll like check out every once in a while, but it's not like for people who consume anime where you're like looking for the next best thing. And at least for me, when I was in Japan, and I can get that that's just like a general question just to like kind of break the ice. But for me, I never knew how to like answer that question, because I know how like anime watchers are perceived. And I'm like, if I'm like, yeah, I watch anime, then they're going to be like, fuck, avoid that one. And so I would always give some like half-assed like, oh yeah, I've seen a couple. And then like see where they go with it. Like if the other person is like, oh yeah, I don't really watch it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm try to find something else to talk about. But if they're like, oh yeah, I've seen a couple, but like this one anime, da 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 da. Then if I've seen it, then it's like, okay, like I'll converse about it. But yeah, that's a loaded question. Even when other like people in America are like, hey, do you watch anime? I'm like, because if they're like super like into it, like an extreme anime fan, then it's like, I don't want to set the impression that we can also be friends. But like
I don't want to have to hate you. So I will lie for your sake.
I dabble in anime.
I partake in Japanese cartoon.
An occasional Saturday morning rerun.
You say this as a joke, but I actually do that. Like,
yeah,
I have this like radar for like potential weeb censor if I meet someone, and if they're like, oh, have you watched the latest rerun of the latest? Sorry, I don't want to be mean to everybody who's like a huge anime fan, but that's like my impression, right? And I'm very, very like distant when it comes to like hearing that kind of response or conversation. I'm just like, oh, I've watched a few things, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's normally if they bring up a show that's not mainstream that I'm like, oh, I'm more willing to, because in the end,
Yeah.
whenever you're talking to with like, for example, a Japanese person or somebody else who watches anime, that's just another topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Like my whole identity isn't derived around this one
Yeah.
show, and it's gonna be the same for the other person who you're talking to, and it's not like all 100 whatever million Japanese people in this country, this island country, has also watched Naruto Shippuden with English subs just as you have, or like the Toonami
Right.
English dub version with you. They're not going to have that same experience, and they're not going to have that level of connection. So, to be honest, assuming that someone has that level of knowledge about anime and then continuing as if it's not, like as if it's okay, to be honest, is pretty disrespectful. So I just go out of my way to just be like, yeah, I don't really watch it that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a really tough. Like, I'm like a closet anime fan, just because I'm just tired of dealing with
Yeah.
weebs.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't care so much anymore if people know that I watch anime.
Yeah.
But I'm less likely to like talk about it. And also like people are going to be like fucking hipster bitch. But like when things get trendy, I have like a less desire to partake in the conversation,
Oh, same.
because for me it doesn't feel as genuine to me. It's not the same as like randomly coming across like a like-minded person. So it's like if I wanted to hop on Twitter and be like, oh man, that new episode of One Piece, like I don't want anything to do with like the like traction of that right now. Whereas like before, when no one was like really into it, I could maybe like write about it like, oh man, like I found this like dope ass show and like these are the themes that were in it. I'd be more likely to talk about it. Whereas now, like this is just something like I'll do in my private time and like talk to my friends about it. Like I don't need any like outside stranger validation like in my choices.
Yeah, it's the same for me. It's like every time I like watch JoJo reruns, I'm not the one like declaring it out on Twitter or anywhere else in the world like, oh my god, this is amazing, holy shit.
JoJo pose.
Yeah, and like JoJo posing and stuff like that, because I'm a huge JoJo fan, but I don't like tell people. Like I even have like JoJo pajamas that glow in the dark. Like, see, like
You're exposing yourself.
yeah, I know, but then I don't go out of my way to like tell everybody in Japan about it, right? And so it's just
Right.
like I'm aware of the respectful distance I should provide to people when I talk to them about anime. And sometimes that distance can just go even further away. As soon as I smell a tinge of weeb. But yeah, I wanna how about this? Like let's end this on a lighter note. With let's go with like one anime or a manga recommendation that you would recommend that has provoked you into thinking about different themes or insights or something a lot more than mainstream shows. Has there been one in your mind?
Since we talked about it, the only thing that like first pops into mind is like Psychopaths. And it's hard to talk about without kind of like spoiling.
Right.
But I've always had a fascination with like the criminal mind, the way that it thinks, the way that it acts and stuff like that. And so when I'm watching this anime that has developed technology basically to be able to read someone's emotions and also like pre-label people as in like, oh, this person is more likely to like create a crime, and as far to go as like these people can't be rehabilitated and stuff like that. um that really made me think not only about people as individual and our psyches, but also because our technology is fucking, it grows so fast now. Like, is this the kind of stuff that can ultimately like be trusted? Like, can you trust the technology to deal with human emotion, you know? So there was like a lot of little instances in that anime that the characters get into where they have to kind of question stuff like that. And I remember that being like a really, I haven't watched the second season yet. I always mean to, but after the first season, I was like, fuck. What about for you?
I also still haven't watched Psychopaths, so even though I haven't, a lot of people recommended it to me before. I believe the premise is like with the tech, and you follow like criminal investigators or policemen or something like that. But yeah, yeah, Psychopaths for sure. My recommendation does not have an anime. I don't. I'm gonna be maybe a hot take here. It's a manga. I don't think an anime would do the manga justice because of its intentions. The manga I'm recommending, God, English, lol, is called Dance Subaru. So Dance Subaru is it follows the story of a girl who had a troubled childhood, and she had this childhood trauma where I think it was her younger brother had this like cancer or something, and she couldn't cope with the pain of losing her sibling. So she thought about, and then she saw like ballet or something at a show. So she thought about dancing in front of her brother um, every night or something like that. And she thought that she was doing him a service because by dancing, because he was at terminal stage already, she was dancing to convey her love for him. And on the day of his death, she danced something almost like a dance of death. And the trauma of that event had caused her to lose a large part of herself. So she coped with that event by dancing, and then she became a really, really good ballerina. And then you follow her story as she becomes a pro ballerina, moving from Japan to US and then trying to make it big. And then there's just some powerful scenes throughout there. Honestly, I cried at the end of the manga. And you don't really, I don't know about you, but I don't really cry at comics. But this one was one where I cried. Like this one was the one.
Everything.
Okay, okay. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, you do. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one is like I cried a lot. Not at the sad scenes, because the sad scenes, yes, it was really painful to read through them, but I held it in. But the author's attempts at expressing motion in a static comic was so powerful, because, for example, they have to draw people dancing ballet, and they have to showcase motion. And to me, it just looks so beautiful how they were showing it. They even show like emotion, even like anger, and like they were telling the story and everything, and I just remember like tearing up because it was just really powerful. So Dance Subaru Kun, I think, or Dance Subaru, it's really, really powerful and amazing. And the main character is just super flawed. So it was great storytelling.
In terms of like manga, you just made me remember. I forgot because I don't really. It's cool to see it like put together like visually in anime, but the manga is just way better. With The Promised Neverland. That one had me fucking shook. Because again, that's another just interesting choice of representation where it's like, if they wrote this story about like a pig farm or something, it would not have like the same impact. But because you're using like physical human children, like you think about it a lot more. So like reading this manga got me all interested into like class divides and also like the quality of the food that like we produce. Because throughout like this manga and story, they have different types of farms for these children. And you have like your top grade farms where the kids are given these like really nice lives. And then you also have farms where they're just like brain dead children hooked up to like machines, just like pumping nutrients into them. And the demons that run this like society, you have like your elite ones who get like the best food that allows them to have these very like human functioning like brains and stuff like that. And then ones that are given kind of like low end food, they can only develop like so far. So that story got me thinking a lot on just like class disparities, especially when it comes to like the quality of food that we are able to access. Because at least like in the States, if you want anything that's labeled like organic or good for you, like it's fucking expensive. So people with lower income or people that have like a whole family to feed, they have to be buying like stuff that isn't so great for you. And you have to take into account like how that makes your body feel, how that makes your mind feel. So reading that manga made me think like a lot about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, these are some deep recommendations. I've watched the anime for Neverland. I haven't. I should read the manga though. I know it's gonna be way more intense. Yes, the anime version still pretty. I gotta say it's still quite good. It does make you think. It's like quite provocative in terms of the, not even the story itself, the world setting. It was just really beautiful lore building right there. So yeah, you know, for our anime watchers, it's just beyond ninjas and bankais and super saiyans. It's the depth of anime compels you to want to think about the societal implications and to not always and to not treat the creators of anime as if they are breathing it 24/7. Because that will be the same as me going to like every American going like, you know, how's your ranch in Texas or something, or like, you know, which bars do you go to for your salons and Western cowboy scenes? Like, it's just like just speaking in stereotypes, right? It'll be worse. So yeah, I feel like we've just like spent 2 hours just shitting on the anime art form, but also from a critical standpoint, it's just good to talk about these in a very healthy fashion.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that being said, let's just leave it for now. Anything else you want to add in? Otherwise, we are good.
No, I think I'm good.
All right, okay. Right, that's it for this week's episode of Kanpai Chronicles. Sadly, no kanpai with any alcohol, but I think we could just kanpai some kind
hydrate
of
with water.
Yeah, with water, anime 2D beer somewhere in here. And you know, if you like this episode, or if you have something to a comment or some thoughts on anime in general of anything we talked about, you know, leave a comment in the YouTube version down below or tweet at us. We'd love to talk about anime also even of the shows that we watch, sure.
Yeah.
But not as weebs, but human beings. And I think that'll be a good way of putting it. So yeah, that being said, thank you for listening to us on your favorite podcast listening app or on YouTube. And we'll see you in the next episode. This is your host, Norman, and
hello.
Bye-bye.